bunch of rich pine right there. Oh yeah. Whenever we go out in the woods, I always keep my eye out for rich pine. When a pine tree dies, or if a limb on a pine tree dies, all the sap goes back to the trunk and collects there and turns into a kind of a hard resin, and it's very flammable. And I always keep my eye out for it in the woods, just to have along with me while I'm in the woods, or I always bring it back home too to start a fire with at home. This is a beetle kill white pine, I think. Red pine usually is a better source for rich pine, but this will do. When it dies, all the resin goes back, and as you can see, right where the limbs came out of the trunk, right at the base of the limb is where you'll find the rich pine. Even on a live tree, a dead limb on a live tree, if you can cut it off right at the base of the tree, oftentimes there'll be rich pine right there at the base as well. In other areas of the country, they call it different things. Some people call it lighter pine. Some people call it fat lighter. We've just always called it rich pine because that's what I've heard it called as a boy growing up, and that's just what I've always called it.
So rich pine, or lightered knot, or lightered, that Matt was talking about, that we love to get out. If we're out in the woods, we just keep an eye out for it because it's such an easy way to start the fires in the basement in our wood stove. But it always reminds me of two stories. One, when Granny and Pap first moved here to Wilson Holler, they built a house. Pap built a house. I think he borrowed $10,000, so that tells you it wasn't a very elaborate house, but still it was a new house to them, and something neither one of them had ever had was a new house. But when Granny's mother, Gazzie, when she come the first time to spend a few days with her in a new house and to just look at everything and see how it was, they went on a walk in the woods just down below the house. I guess maybe Granny was showing her where Pap, that they might in the future build a garden. That was when we just moved in. I was probably 5, maybe about 5 when we moved in. But Gazzie come from, of course, days gone by where everything she did, she had to build a fire. She had to build a fire to cook. She had to build a fire to heat water, to can, or to wash clothes, or to take a bath, or for anything. You had to heat water with a fire. So she really paid attention to stuff like rich pine. Not that she had to at that time in her life, but because she come from an era of where she did have to be sure that she had things to make her life easier. So as they walked out in the woods, Gazzie told Granny, she said, "Oh my, this is the best place I've ever seen. There's just rich pine laying everywhere for the taking." So she thought that was just a sign that Granny and Pap had really picked the best place to live, because there was just an abundance of the rich pine that she was used to needing. So that's just a sweet story that I love. Another story was shared by one of my readers on the Blind Pig and the Acorn, G.W. Newton, and I believe he's passed away now, but he did write some books, so if you're lucky, maybe you could find one of them. But he grew up farther south than where I'm at in western North Carolina, but he had a great story, and I believe his family called it lightered. They just called it lightered. But so he said when he was growing up that his dad wasn't always around, and his mom had raised a lot of kids, and she had to just kind of do things on her own. He said when his daddy was there, he was great, but then he would wander off and be gone, and it just left up to the mother to raise the family, Well, they had a house, but nearby there was an old cabin, and no one lived in that. Maybe I can't remember for sure, maybe they'd lived in it before, and then they got the newer house. Anyway, one day the pigs got out, and the woman, his mother, she had to chase the pigs and get them back. She had to catch them. Well, one of them went under that cabin, and so the tale went that she crawled in after it, and she got the pig and put it back up. Anyway, so then years later, like when the dad had passed away and GW was grown and all that, they were going to donate that old cabin for to like a historical museum. They were going to come get it and take it apart and take it back and put it back together. You know how they do those kind of things. Well, when they did, underneath they realized the foundation of it were these huge big pine trees. The logs are, I guess, stumps from pine trees that they had set that made the foundation for the cabin. Well, there were all these weird hack marks out of them. And they were trying to figure out what in the world caused, you know, why did they hack on them before they used them for the foundation? But some of the hacks looked, you know, like maybe they were newer than the foundation would have been for a cabin that age. Anyway, the mother finally told them, she said, I can tell you what those hack places are. She said, when your daddy was here and I needed lightered to make sure that I could start my fires every day, he kept it for me. When he went off and I didn't have none, I had to figure out a way to get it myself. Well, when I chased that pig that time under that house and had to crawl under there and get it, I found those stumps, and they weren't nothing but pure lightered. So I just kept that secret to myself. And then when your daddy was gone off, I didn't have to worry about it. I knew if I run out of lightered, I knew right where I could go to get some, and that's where I got it. So over the years, she'd kept those stumps of lightered a secret from her husband, because she said if he knew it, he'd never get me any more. He'd tell me to go under the house every time and get it. Anyway, that's in one way that's a heartbreaking story, but in another way, what a story of resilience. So if you're ever out in the woods, maybe you can keep an eye out for it, even if you're not going to really start a fire with it or take it home with you. It smells so good. It's almost like the smell of Christmas, or I guess kind of the smell of, what would you say, Matt, turpentine?
Turpentine.
It's kind of like turpentine, but still it's just got a fresh, clean scent, like pine, like you think it would. But it's just amazing that a tree like this that's been laying here for I don't know how many years after the beetle damage got in it and it died and fell, and now, but it's still good if somebody just knows to look at it. And Granny Gazzie and GW's mother, why they thought it was such a prize was because in those days, you got to think about it, like every time we go out in the woods, we find it. But if everybody in the whole community was out in the woods looking for it, it would be scarce. You know, it would be hard to find. So that's why both of them knew what a treasure it was, because they'd come from a time where everybody was out hunting it. So if you found your own little supply of rich pine like GW's mother did, you knew you had really found a treasure. What?
I hear them, they're right there.
Yeah.
You see them?
I heard them. I heard a tinkle.
Crap with this toboggan. It looks it.